The draft has ended, but do we have more answers or more questions? We'll talk about it next with little brother Rohan Chakravarthi. Stay tuned. What is up, fam? Thank you so much for tuning in to So Real Sports Talk. I am your host, So Real Sunil, and I have my brother from another mother, my man Rohan Chakravarthi. It was his birthday last week, so he took the day off, but he's back every single Wednesday with me. Rohan, how's your night going, my man?
Going good. Got a little school stuff, really, and that's my only obligation outside. But yeah, it's going pretty good. How about you?
Can't complain, man. I definitely don't have school going on, but yeah, I got a lot to talk about. Definitely with the draft being done, I wanted to get your take. I mean, I've been listening to you speak about the draft. I feel like every single day, pretty much. But a lot of people are attacking this draft in the sense that people are talking about what draft picks were good, what draft picks were bad. And I just wanted to do something a little bit different. Obviously we could go one by one through the draft and through the draft picks and talk about what we liked, what we didn't like. But I just felt this draft was a little bit interesting to me, Rohan. I mean, the consensus with 49er faithful was that coming out of this draft, the 49ers were going to get some kind of center help, a safety, a slot corner, maybe an edge, maybe a receiver thrown in there, probably a late round running back. But if anybody, like the chances of anybody picking this draft, the way the 49ers draft, was very different. Clearly, a lot of the things that the faithful thought that a front office was going to do, they didn't do. So I wanted to get a sense from you about taking the big picture of what the 49ers did this weekend in the draft. What did we learn about the vision of this front office?
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about it, right? Last week, what did John Lynch say during his pre-draft press conference on Monday? John Lynch, he comes out and says, we embrace competition at every position. And I mean, many alluded to that being at the quarterback position, right? Where Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance are currently the two best quarterbacks on the roster. But in reality, it was for every position in the draft. The 49ers didn't go in with a significant, it's not that they didn't go in maybe with the significant need, but they went in with the purpose of selecting players to build to their roster rather than addressing a specific position immediately. And so you look at the draft and you look at the conclusion, you have a ton of edge and defensive lineman overall talent, right? Because you would added Kimoko Toure the week before the draft. Then you draft two players, not just one, but two in Drake Jackson and Kalia Davis to now have an extremely deep defensive line room that can battle it out in training camp and in the offseason program. Then look at the wide receiver room, right? You had 5, 6 active bodies before the draft. You bring in Danny Gray, and now you have another good spot of competition there. And not only that, you go out an undrafted free agency and you sign guys like Taysir Mack, and then you also sign Tay Martin out of Oklahoma State. The former was out of Pittsburgh, and Martin is out of Oklahoma State. Some other extra bodies, so you have another 8, 9 guys that can compete there. Cornerback, you don't just draft one, you draft Womack, but also draft Tariq Castro-Fields on top of signing back Jason Verrett to have an extremely deep cornerback room as well as signing a good amount of undrafted free agents. The 49ers were really busy in the undrafted free agent pool. And then offensive line. 2 offensive linemen there in the draft, 2 top-tier offensive linemen in undrafted free agency in Donovan West and Jason Poe, as well as a couple of extra additions like Sam Schluter out of Minnesota. So really, to me, it was expanding on what they said about the depth, and they really looked to solidify it, not really just one position, but every position on their roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it very well, Rohan. I mean, clearly this team or this front office was happy with the roster that they have. I think they felt like they had starters at every single position. And I think, maybe some of the faithful looked at positions like center, positions like safety, positions like slot corner, and felt like there was a big need for those positions because maybe the fan base isn't as secure in having solutions on the roster as is. But I think overall, what I'm really learning, Rohan, and you talked about the depth, but it looks like the 49ers do value depth over just premium talent. It seems like this team believes in their ability to draft, believe in their ability to develop, and it seems like they're looking for more guys that aren't necessarily needing to come in year one and be impactful players, but guys that are going to be rotation players, starters in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's kind of what we've seen these last few drafts. And it seems like this team is when I look at it, Rohan, it reminds me a lot of what Bill Belichick does with the New England Patriots back when they had the dynasty. Obviously, they had the quarterback position solidified with the GOAT and Tom Brady. But when it came to the draft, it was all about just sheer numbers. You just bring in sheer number of players. Some of them work out, some of them don't work out. But that ended up creating a dynasty where you're able to move off of guys a year early versus a year late because you constantly have a replacement, a young up-and-coming replacement that's been sitting on the bench maybe for a year, 2 years, that could come in, knows the system, and be productive immediately when they get the chance.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Right.
No, I was just going to ask you, if that is the vision, how do you feel about that vision being, because it's somewhat different from what previous 49er regimes kind of their way of approaching this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think first of all, the interesting point that you bring up about depth over premium talent, I think we had a clear example of that from the early part of the Shanahan-Lynch regime to the current day. In 2019, what did Kyle Shanahan, or prior to the season, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch said, guess what? We want to solidify the defensive line, make it the most important position of our entire team, and make it the most feared. They go ahead, they trade a second-round pick for Dee Ford, pay him 5 years, $87.5 million. Now, in my opinion, at the time, that despite the injury concerns, obviously, that was an addition of premium talent as opposed to depth, right? No, so while it wasn't as deep as other lines have been, you had Dee Ford, you had DeForest Buckner, Arik Armstead, and Nick Bosa, one of the best defensive lines in terms of pure talent. However, in 2021, the 49ers had very, very similar success despite going with a completely different approach. You don't have 4 superstars, right? Instead, DeForest Buckner is no longer with the team. Dee Ford had a much lower role. And instead, it's not one player, but a multitude of players that step in and contribute in limited roles, like an Arden Key, like a Jordan Willis, like a Charles Omenihu added in the middle of the season, like a Kevin Givens, Kentavious Street at the defensive tackle position, like a DJ Jones. You have all these a multitude of role players that kind of fill in, but it's surprisingly enough, because of how elite the coaching staff has been on the defensive line, the production remains the same. And so, yeah, I do think that this is important because the 49ers have shown that they can win with depth over premium talent. And I think that could be a new thing because especially in the era that we are in today, where a lot of players are getting paid top tier money, to maintain rosters that can compete on a consistent basis, you can't necessarily acquire a ton of premium talent and have that on your roster because it's just not the best way to build a roster because you have so many holes. Instead, if you get depth pieces at certain positions while also having premium talent like a Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, and the 6 premier players that the 49ers have, you can build a roster around that, and you can have a roster that is filled with talent at multiple positions of need.
Yeah, and I think, I started it by saying premium talent, but it's not that the 49ers avoid of premium talent. It's just most of their premium talent is homegrown, right?
Exactly.
They've been able to draft very, very well, to draft multiple, all pros that are their premium talent. I mean, they don't have to go out in free agency and fill a whole bunch of holes with premium talent. Kind of like what, we see the shift or the stark dichotomy with the Rams in the same division. They're more forget about the homegrown. Let's go out, trade potential players for players that we know are performing. It obviously led them to a Super Bowl last season, but it seems like the 49ers, instead of going more towards that thought process. They just doubled down on their own thought process, which I want to ask you again. How do you feel about this? Because this is clearly a philosophy that this team is starting to implement. Do you believe in it, or do you think that the other side of maybe what the Rams are doing, what Tampa Bay did to win their Super Bowl, do you think that's the way to, be able to be competitive?
No, I think like there isn't necessarily a wrong way, right? Because obviously both those teams have shown that they can win Super Bowls with that type of roster building, right? Tampa Bay obviously acquired Tom Brady via free agency, and some of their talent was homegrown. I do think, though, the one thing that has been understated with both of those teams and the 49ers is that they are very good at drafting. The Rams find good players in the mid rounds, in the late rounds that fill out their roster as those depth pieces we were talking about, which is why. But because they acquire so much talent outside of those draft picks, those draft picks get overlooked in a way. Like Ernest Jones was a rookie last year. Nobody knows who he is, but he played fairly solid as the main linebacker for the Los Angeles Rams last year. Now, when you talk about the linebacker position for the Rams, it's their weak spot. Everyone says, oh, throw against the middle against the Rams. And that's because you have guys like Troy Reader and things, and you have such talent on the defensive line and in the secondary that you overlook players like Ernest Jones. But the point is that I'm making is both teams draft pretty well, but they also acquire a ton of talent. And I'm not thinking that the 49ers really stray away from that, right? You see Trent Williams on the roster. You've seen guys like Quan Alexander, D Ford. I can name players and players, Weston Richburg, Richard Sherman. It's just not necessarily worked out to the magnitude that it's worked out for the other two teams for the 49ers. So their picks that they've made have been spotlighted a lot more. Also, they were also worse teams when they started, and they didn't necessarily trade multiple first-round picks for a guy like Jared Goff to draft him. Instead, they stayed put, and they had multiple first-round selections over the years, which is where they've been allowed to acquire top-tier talent, as well as the late round bloomers like a George Kittle and Fred Warner, and multiple players like that in the past. So I don't think that it's necessarily completely different strategies that these teams are incorporating. It's just for some teams, one of those strategies works, like building through free agency and trades, and for another team, like the drafting is a little better than those moves for the 49ers specifically.
Yeah, and I think you made a extremely smart point. The 49ers have tried to be aggressive as far as bringing in, players, and not all of them have worked out. D Ford was somebody that they brought in. Unfortunately, his injuries held him back from really making as big of an impact when he did play. Obviously, he made the impact, so on and so forth. Really like few and far between it has worked. I mean, a guy like Trent Williams, obviously, Lakin worked. Alex Mack seems to be working, but for the most part, it seems like some of those big swings that they have made haven't panned out. So it makes sense why they would just double down, because they seem to draft very, very well. So might as well continue to do that. James Coombs asked a really good question, Rohan, and I want to get your idea on it. Questions about draft philosophy. Who do you think is the main architect of the draft? Is it Lynch, Adam Peters, or Kyle Shanahan?
I think it's a combination of all of them.
Cop out.
No,
I'm just kidding.
Because everyone always points to Lynch, Peters, and Kyle Shanahan when you make these draft assumptions, right? But in reality, it's not necessarily just them. It's the area scouts for every single place, right? Like guys like Nick Zakelj that people have never heard of before. I mean, I personally heard of him because of the combine, but guys like him, people have never heard of before. How do these guys get on radars? And that's because of the area scouts that find out, oh, this is one of the best players in our area. That gets translated up and up the ladder. And then obviously people are advocating for drafting those players. I personally think out of these three, it would be Lynch a little more, or sorry, not Lynch, Peters a little more in terms of the players, because he's the one who's mainly like looking over who's the best players on the board and who like the 49ers have gone through and who they like the most, because he's the one most involved with that. But in terms of philosophy, I think it's Shanahan, because obviously the offense revolves around Kyle Shanahan's mind. Tyrion Davis-Price is a Kyle Shanahan pick. I think like that's the reason the 49ers selected him. Same with Danny Gray, who excels after the catch and also has that deep speed that Kyle Shanahan really wants that he lacks now that he had in Atlanta with a guy like Julio Jones as a deep threat, right? So I think philosophy wise, it might be Shanahan. Players wise players wise, it might be Peters, and then personnel wise, it might be Lynch.
Yeah, and I think whomever, because we'll never know. I think they're pretty tight-lipped about the decision making. I do think it is more of a collaborative effort, even though I said it was a cop out for you to pick that answer. But I do believe that they do come together. I think later in the draft, I would say that's probably more Peters and the scout team and stuff like that. I do tend to see the 49ers in the first 3 rounds. That's where they're doing the most reaching. Like they're reaching for a position that they've deemed a need. Obviously, we just saw them pick, Davis Price, which was a pick that I think everybody thought they might pick a running back, but nobody thought it was going to be that high, I believe. But that tends to be the rounds where they do kind of reach, and then fourth round and below is when they kind of let the draft board fall to them. But I wanted to ask you. I've seen a stark difference between the last 2 drafts, last year's draft and this year's draft, compared to the first 4 drafts that the 49ers have done. Do you see any changes in the 49ers strategy when it comes to drafting?
I'll agree with you here. I do think there is a strategy in terms of, or I think the strategy is changing, and I'll say why. Over the first 4 years or 3 years, I guess, of the Shanahan Lynch regime, the 49ers were inheriting a team that was really a really poor team roster wise. So what do you do in those first couple of years? You have to get talent that can that can play immediately. I think that that's what came into the notion when you get those players. And also they were picking higher, right? They were picking in the top 10s, picking in the top 5. Solomon Thomas top 3 pick, Mike McGlinchey top 10 pick. Nick Bosa was the second overall pick, right? Those were the first 3 years of the regime. So you're trying to get the best, not necessarily the best players available, but you're trying to get immediate contributors because you want to get a product out there that showcases Kyle Shanahan's mind, right? Because the NFL, in my opinion, is a year-to-year league. Every coach at some point is in jeopardy of losing their job because you need to showcase results, right? We just saw it with Houston last year. I brought this example up yesterday, but you see it with Houston. David Culley inherited a roster that was worse than the year before, and it was a lot of turnover because there were 28 to 30 one-year deals that Nick Caserio signed. Instead of getting worse, David Culley actually improved the team by an entire game and he got fired. So it shows that the NFL is a year-to-year league. You need to compete. So I think when the 49ers were first starting this rebuild back up again, after picking at, well, originally they were picking at number 2 in 2017. They're trying to get these immediate contributors and then obviously trying to find gems in the late rounds that they can have high potential on. And those guys they hit on, right? You saw George Kittle in 2017. DJ Jones was in the 6th round of 2017. And then Fred Warner, obviously, in 2018, a 3rd round pick, and things like that. But over the past 2 years, the 49ers have built their base. They've built the talent already on the roster where they don't necessarily need to find immediate contributors, but instead, guys that can help you now, but also can be long-term pieces. When you look at 2020's draft, Trey Lance is the epitome of that, right? When you hear from NDSU guys surrounding Trey Lance, like his quarterbacks coach who was on with Jesse a couple weeks ago, he advised that Trey Lance take a redshirt year in his freshman year in the NFL, just like Carson Wentz was advised to do, although the Eagles were too bad, so Carson Wentz had to start in week 8. So that's the difference, right? Where now we're kind of building towards the future as well. Trey Lance, Aaron Banks, Elijah Mitchell, in my opinion, were all picks for 2022, and Diamond Lenore because K1 Williams was a starter. Now this year, we have a couple of those similar guys, right? Drake Jackson is probably an immediate contributor, but Ty Davis Price is also an immediate contributor. But Danny Gray, there's already a loaded receiver room where you have 3 options from last year and Ray McLeod. So Danny Gray probably is wide receiver 5 going into the year. That's probably a pick for the future, even though he possesses something that can be an immediate contribution as well. Spencer Burford, in my opinion, is a little more of a projection pick. I think that's a pick for the future as well because we have so much depth. I think the 5th-round pick in Samuel Womack is also a pick for the future, right? You don't know if he's going to beat out Lenore for the starting spot, but he's got traits. Tariq Castro-Fields has traits. So that's, I think, the new philosophy. You don't necessarily need immediate contributors, but you're now looking for guys with the highest potential.
I love it. You said it very, very well. I want to shout out some people in the chat. Melissa, what's up with you, girl? Thank you for joining us in. James, obviously, throwing some great questions our way. Good stuff. What does my shirt say? Let me take your comment off. It says, I'm not excited. Because I'm not.
He's lying.
But I'm always excited. It's the antithesis of my personality. But I appreciate all of you guys joining in. I think you're absolutely right. I've seen a big difference in what the 49ers are doing drafting. One of the biggest things, Rohan, is I think they were taking higher swings on potential. And now I think they've really focused in on scheme specific guys that fit the culture and guys that will immediately be able to have a skill set specific to where they envision them playing. And what I mean, and also the second thing is they're not taking these risks on injury-prone players anymore. And that tend to be the issue with their earlier drafts is they would take guys that maybe had a high ceiling or had a lot of potential, but had a lot of red flags, whether it be off the field issues, injury prone guys, things of that nature that ended up not working out, as recently as 3 years ago in a guy like Javon Kinlaw, right? So what I've noticed these last 2 years, that hasn't been the case. They're taking guys who are healthier. They're taking guys that fit a skill set that they need. And just much to your point, they're not only taking guys that they need to have an immediate impact because of how well this roster has been built out from previous drafts and talent that they're bringing in from free agency and whatnot. So I'm a big fan of what they're doing. Like I mentioned, I keep bringing up the Patriots because I think the 49ers are really trying to build a dynasty where not only are they going to go out and be able to compete for a Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl, but be that way consistently for a very long time. And that's what I really like about what they're doing. But you mentioned a lot of players. I love the way that you went guy by guy, and you kind of answered this question, but let's get it just crystallized for everybody. And that's not the question I wanted to ask. My question was, will any of these draft picks be starters this season? And I know you mentioned Drake, but I don't necessarily think he's going to be a guy that's going to start from day one. I think he's going to be more of a specialist, the guy that they ease into it because of how much depth they have there. And it seems like the 49ers as of late are playing rookies less and less. I obviously people point to Elijah Mitchell, but I tend to believe if Raheem Mostert didn't get injured, we probably wouldn't have seen a lot of Elijah Mitchell. We saw Lenore come in spot duty. He got yanked. Ambry Thomas was in and out of the lineup. Obviously, a guy like Aaron Banks didn't see much playing time. Jalen Moore saw some playing time, but then was in and out of the lineup as well. So it doesn't seem like the 49ers really use a lot of rookies. So seeing as this team is what it is now, how many of these draft picks do you think will be starters this season?
That's a very interesting question. And for me, like you brought up Drake Jackson. You're right. I think it's hard to dictate who's going to be a starter on the defensive line because to me, it's a twofold question. When you talk about starters, normally you're talking about who goes out in the first play of the game. However, the first play of the game is sub packages. It's never the pass rushing specialist packages. So guys like Arden Key were never starters last year. Guys like Drake Jackson were never starters last year. So when I talk about starters, I usually refer to snap counts. And so will Drake Jackson be one of the higher snap counts on the defensive line alongside Arik Armstead and Nick Bosa? And yeah, it's a good question because the 49ers have a ton of depth. I expect Drake Jackson to be like an Arden Key type of snap count role like he had last year. And so that accounts for about 30 to 40% of the defensive snaps. I think that's where Drake Jackson will end up having. I do think that Kamoka Ture might start. or to be honest, I don't know because it depends. Who's the best run defender on the team? Training camp will figure that out. Drake Jackson, though, has the potential to start and or has the potential to have a higher snap count if he progresses quicker than expected as the season goes along, because he has a ton of pass rush potential. It's just he hasn't necessarily that's an interesting comp, but he doesn't necessarily have the experience, right? In his freshman year, that was the year he most was utilized as an edge rusher, 5.5 sacks, but he was dropped back into coverage. He played a little more of a traditional linebacker role over the past couple of years, and he was just utilized poorly. So it's another adjustment to him. But Drake Jackson has already taken that first step of adjustment, bulking up. He's around 275, he said. And so at that weight, I think he does have the potential to be a full-time edge, which I want him to be for the 49ers. And so I think he does have some potential in terms of snap count, but starter, that's a little questionable because you just don't know who's going to start on a daily basis or on a regular basis for the 49ers due to packaging. But running back Tyrion Davis-Price, I think, has the highest chance of any rookie to start. And that's interesting to say because a lot of people deem him as the worst pick. And here's why. He said it himself. He's going to be a compliment to Elijah Mitchell, that 1-2 punch. But Tyrion Davis-Price also provides something different. Elijah Mitchell, you'll probably use more of that outside zone scheme type of run, probably limit his carries a little more than last year where he was up to 25 carries in certain games, up in the 20s. And obviously that was cause for concern because he was getting injured. Tyrion Davis-Price, though, the reason that I think that he could start a couple of games is because he's got the explosiveness that you want at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of the game, what do you want to do? You want to run in between the tackles and have a physical presence, set the tone immediately, and Tyrion Davis-Price can do that at the running back position. I think that that's really important. And so I do think that he has the highest potential, although really, in my opinion, I don't know really about many of these guys. But the guys that I want to point out is the offensive lineman. I think that Nick Zakej, however you say his name, has the potential to compete at center to start in 2022. Additionally, I think Donovan West and Jason Poe should be in that same battle as well to start for center. Should Alex Mack retire, I think that will be the most interesting rookie battle in a way, because I think those three guys could compete with Daniel Brunskill to start at center. Right guard might be an open competition as well if the 49ers don't deem Jalen Moore as a good starter for that pick. But yeah, it is interesting, right? Because now it's kind of depth pieces for this for the picks that the 49ers made. But those are my guys. And obviously Samuel Womack could compete. I don't expect him to win the job, but that's another competition. But like the names that I named, those are mainly the guys. And sorry, I can't forget one guy. My bad, Sunil. But I can't forget one guy, and that is Tariq Castro-Fields. I'll just say one thing, just throw it out there because I've been saying it a bit. I think he could potentially convert to safety. He's not the best tackler, but his lack of fluidity might be best addressed at safety, where he can utilize the size, length, and the traits that he has. And I think that that's important as a safety. He has to improve as a tackler. So let's see if they use him strictly as a coverage safety. But I think that could be an interesting option as well.
Yeah, and the 49ers are notorious for picking a player and then moving him out of their natural position that they played all through college.
I mean, it's true, but that was a funny comment out there. Yeah.
I personally don't think any of these guys ends up being a starter. I think you're right. Davis-Price has the highest chance, but that's just, I think, going to be due to injuries. I really think that most of these guys are depth pieces that may get some playing time here and there, but as far as just meaningful playing time, I really don't see any of these guys making a roster. And that's not because they're bad picks by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of solid talent ahead of them that are veterans, and just this coaching staff seemingly trusting the veteran player over the rookie. And we've just seen that as of late. I do have one question for you, because you talked about the 1-2 punch with Elijah Mitchell and Davis-Price. What does that say to you about Trey Sermon? And does he still have a role on this team, do you see, moving forward?
So Trey Sermon it's an interesting test case, right? Because you normally wouldn't expect Shanahan to draft a running back this early in a class with so much depth at many positions, which means running back would get pushed. Like I was looking in the sixth round and I was still questioning the Tyrion Davis price pick because Tyler Goodson was there in the sixth round. There were guys. Jerome Ford was there in the fifth round, and I had Jerome Ford as a higher ranked running back than Tyrion Davis Price in my rankings. And so like there's value, and obviously because he's in a Shanahan scheme, I feel like Tyrion Davis Price has the best chance for success in a way. But I don't know really what Trey Sermon's role is right now because you just got your pass protector on third downs in Tyrion Davis Price. He's not a pass catching option. So if Trey Sermon can potentially develop that trait in the offseason, maybe that's where his role is, right? But now you have a nice 1-2 complement. It's very similar to Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman when they split the carries evenly, 137 to 137. I think you could see a very, very similar complement with these two guys, but that doesn't really leave much room for the other guys. And me personally, I do think that Jeff Wilson Jr. has eclipsed Trey Sermon on the depth chart just because he's a more reliable option. And so, yeah, I do hope the best for Trey Sermon, but I feel like this pick indicated in a way that Trey Sermon's role is going to be somewhat diminished in 2022, and that they may have realized that they didn't really hit on that pick.
Yeah, that's tough because I mean, clearly Trey Sermon was a stud coming out of college, Ohio State. He carried that offense on many occasions, and to see him just not have the impact. I mean, we saw flashes of him last season. It just seems like for whatever reason, Kyle Shanahan hasn't bought into him. And picking another guy in the third round, I agree. I think that that might. I don't know if it officially is the nail in the coffin for Trey Sermon because this team in 2019, when they had the most success rushing, they ended up second behind the Ravens and averaging around 140 yards per game. They had a three-headed monster. It was Coleman, it was Mostert, and it was Breida.
Right.
So maybe,
Right.
but
Sorry,
the
I meant
difference
to
was.
allude to like that third guy being Wilson. That's what I meant. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I got what you were saying, but I don't know if that necessarily if Sermon can't be that third role.
Definitely.
The interesting thing though is usually like with the Coleman, Breida, Mostert, there was Coleman that was kind of like the bruiser, and then you had the change of pace home run guys in Breida and Mostert, and it seems like I guess now there's 5 running backs on the roster seem to kind of be the same type of running back. They all seem to type of be the bruiser, which is
Yeah, you're
interesting.
right.
And
You don't like. I mean, Elijah Mitchell is the most similar to the outside zone guy, but the other guys, like in terms of outside zone, I feel like he's the guy with the most speed in a way. But the other guys, yeah, I mean that those are guys where you don't necessarily see that home run speed. They're bruisers in a way. You're right.
which makes me think that this is and then when you look at what the 49ers did as far as how many offensive linemen they ended up drafting as well as in the undrafted free agency, does this turn into just a power run where they're going to just beat the opposing defensive line up to the point where in the third and fourth quarters now it's just gashing people for 10, 15, 20 yards a run because they're just going to be more physical than the teams. And that was kind of what they did in 2019, where they just dominated the line of scrimmage and just beat people up in third and fourth quarter. You just saw the opposing defensive line huffing and puffing, and these Breida and Mostert were just gashing guys for 40, 50, 60 yards. Maybe we don't see those type of plays, but maybe it's more 10, 15, 20 yards, and maybe even a guy like Trey Lance scrambling for big yardage and stuff like that. Maybe that just seems to be what they're gearing towards now. They don't need as much home run hitting because they have the arm of Trey Lance, where maybe some of the bigger plays can be down throwing the ball versus in 2019 with Jimmy, who couldn't throw the ball down the field like Trey Lance can. So maybe that's what they're looking at right now.
Could be, yeah, it could be. We'll see in training camp how they strategize, right, and how they kind of utilize this running back room. But yeah, maybe they're trying to make up for their lack of options in that way, like in 2019, with the passing game element, because that's obviously going to kind of expand with Trey Lance at quarterback, at least the expectation.
Right. And it's going to be very interesting in training camp, Rohan, because some guys that maybe are fan favorites for the 49ers, guys like Lenore, guys like Trey Sermon, they might not even make the roster with how much depth there is and how much competition there is. There's going to be some guys that people like that are solid, contributors that might not even make the 53-man roster because of just how much competition there is. So it is going to be quite an interesting training camp, to say the least. We'll end on the draft with this question. So after the draft, where did the 49ers get better the most after the draft? So based off of the draft, where do you think the 49ers just got better the most? And I don't think that's proper English, but whatever. Yeah. You know what I mean.
The obvious choice is Drake. Not Drake Jackson, but the edge position, because they got the best player that they got in the entire draft was Drake Jackson. And so obviously the position that you can allude to is the edge. But to me, I'll go with a different place, and I'll say offensive line. And the reason is the offensive line many people thought was a weak spot. Oh, we don't know who our future center is. We don't know where we have uncertainty at every position but Trent Williams. And what do the 49ers do? They went and got versatile players and multiple players that could play center in 2022 itself, but also for the future. I think they solidified this room, and now there are going to be battles. Whereas you thought there might be 8 people lined up to play for the 49ers in 2022. No, we have like 9-10 guys, and all of them can compete for those 8 roster spots. And so right now, I think the locks, in a way, are Trent Williams and Aaron Banks. Those are the 2 locks that I think will start on the offensive line, because we don't necessarily know how Mike McGlinchey is, although I do believe him as like a 75% chance because he's expected to come back. But at the center,
if healthy, he's a lock, right? If healthy, he's a lock.
Okay, that's a better way to put it. If healthy, he's a lock. Yes, if healthy, he's a lock. So when we look at it now, I think that they've just improved by adding more depth. Edge position, the reason I'm not going to go with it is because we already had a ton of depth. Wide receiver, I thought we had 4 pretty talented wide receivers alongside special teams players, so we had a ton of depth there. I think offensive line was the place where we were lacking the most depth, with a quick run or with a good runner-up being the secondary, I think. But the secondary to me has 2 pretty strong pieces in Mosley, Charvarius Ward. Sorry, 3: Mosley, Charvarius Ward, and obviously Jimmy Ward. While the offensive line had necessarily really one really strong piece with Trent Williams. Additionally, I don't think the 49ers improved at the safety position at all in the draft. And so that's where I'm going to ding them a bit on the secondary portion and go offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I think that the 49ers are basically giving us what their game plan is going to be next season, and it's going to be power running. They got big running backs. They got big offensive linemen to come in and compete. And I think they're just going to punish. I think that's what the game plan is going to be. Punish the opposing team, gash them for, 4 to 5 yards per carry. And then third and fourth quarter, you're going to start seeing those 3 and 4 and 5 yard gains turn into 10, 15, 20 yard gains, much like the 2019 49ers that made it to the Super Bowl. But the added dynamic is going to be obviously Trey Lance's arm with his ability to stretch the field. And I think that play action is just going to be extremely nasty. James Coombs, we've both been preaching O-line this offseason. How do you feel about it after the draft now? It's a great question, James. For me personally, I'm a big fan. The guys that I consistently put in my mock drafts were Donovan West and James Poe. And both of those guys ended up being undrafted free agents, which is just amazing and mind-boggling to me. So the other guys that they got on the offensive line, they weren't even on my radar. So I know, Rohan, you said you had heard of them before, but I'm a big fan of what they did. I don't think like I said, it's depth over premium talent. Obviously, for me, I was a big Tyler Linderbaum fan. They ended up obviously not being able to pick him because he went 25th in the first round. Like I told people he was going to go. But But yeah, I mean, I think they did as good as they could with the picks that they had. And I think we're going to see we're going to see 2 or 3 offensive linemen from this draft, whether it be the actual draft or the undrafted free agents, that I think are going to be productive players, either starters or guys that come back up and play big roles in keeping the offensive line healthy.
Yeah, that's fair. Definitely fair.
Cool. Well, let's keep it going. So obviously, we don't know who's playing what position quite yet, but for the most part, we do know that this is the talent pool that the 49ers are going to be selecting from when it comes to narrowing it down to that 53-man roster. So based off of what you're seeing as far as the talent pool that the 49ers have, does this team have enough talent, Rohan, to win a Super Bowl?
Right. So for me, how I classify Super Bowl contenders in a way are really the top 3 to 4 teams in each conference. And to me, I'll say this. I'll be a little safe, but I'll say this. The 49ers classify as one of those top 3 to 4 teams in the conference, in my opinion, at the moment. I think the Buccaneers and the Rams are the solidified top 2 teams, with the 49ers at third right now in the conference, with teams like the Green Bay Packers, Dallas Cowboys, Arizona Cardinals inching in behind those top 3 teams to compete there in the NFC. And so, really, from my criteria, I'd say yes. But obviously, it's a question that we can't really answer at the moment. We saw how the Super Bowl aspirations, in a way, took a huge hit in Week 1 when Jason Verrett, our Pro Bowl level, near Pro Bowl level cornerback, got a ACL tear in Week 1 at the end of the game that significantly harmed our chances. And while we went to the NFC Championship last year, who knows if Barrett's healthy, right? So obviously injuries, especially with this team, play a huge role. But what I'll say is the 49ers right now are a top 3 team in the NFC, or sorry, not top 3, top 4 team in the entirety of the NFC. And so, yeah, I think that with that, they are in somewhat of a contention to at least compete for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're being pretty conservative, as you should be. But for me, I look at it like, did this team get better? And I think hands down, this is a better team, better roster than it was last season. And this team was, a couple plays away from another Super Bowl visit. And I think the positions that they were weaker at, they got a lot better at. Obviously, you can nitpick here. Maybe the offensive line isn't going to be as good. Maybe the safety play isn't going to be as good. But cornerback, much better. Special teams, much better. Defensive line, just as good, if not better. Linebacking core, I think, is going to be better because now you got Azeez, Greenlaw, and Warner all healthy. That's going to be probably the best linebacking core in the league. And then you got, Trey Lance, which is out, I guess the wild card. If he is as good as we think he could be, this team is probably the best team in the NFC if he plays to the level that we think he is. If he plays average, this team is a top 3 team in the NFC. So when you're looking at that, I think that this team is definitely good enough to win a Super Bowl. They've been contenders in 2 out of the last 3 years. Their only Achilles heel has been quarterback play, and I think that they've solidified that with Trey Lance. So yeah, barring just a freak injury to the starting quarterback, I think that this team is in contention and should be a Super Bowl contender. And another reason why I say that is I don't think the Rams are better than they were last season. They've lost a lot of good talent at key positions. And, Tampa Bay, Tom Brady, obviously everybody's waiting for him to fall off the cliff, but eventually Father Time is going to take a hold of him, and he's not going to be able to perform the way that he's performed. Green Bay lost their best offensive weapon, so there's a lot of teams that are usually the cream of the NFC that have a lot of question marks. And I think that the 49ers' biggest question mark is going to be Trey Lance. And I just feel confident that he's going to be really good this year and good enough to carry this team to be competitive. And so I think that they are Super Bowl contenders. For sure, man. No hesitation.
That's your opinion. I mean, it's fair given what you said. I can understand it, and I can definitely see it happening if that's any consolation.
I love it, Rohan. Hey, anytime you agree with me or give me a pat on the back, man, it makes me feel good. But the two biggest storylines going into the draft were: is Debo going to get traded, which he didn't, thank God, and it looks like things are trending towards an amicable end to the Debo situation and him being happy and playing for the 49ers. But the other storyline was what happens with Jimmy Garoppolo. He still isn't traded, Rohan, and from all of the things that we've been hearing when it comes to Lynch and Shanahan, it doesn't seem like cutting Jimmy is an option. And it also doesn't look like there's just a bona fide team that is out there ready to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think some of the good news is a team like the Giants now might throw their hat in the arena because they didn't give Daniel Jones sign him for his 5th-year option, so that shows that they're not all the way sold on him. So maybe more competition means more of a chance because before it was just Carolina. But how do you see this Jimmy Garoppolo situation actually ending with the 49ers?
Right. So I mean, we've been like witnessing it firsthand that the 49ers aren't a team that's going to budge. And at this point, I'm not going to say that it's unrealistic that the 49ers could potentially hold him on the roster and acquire a third round compensatory selection when Garoppolo signs with another team next year. However, I will point this out from what I've heard and what I've seen, other outlets kind of provide. Jimmy Garoppolo, the two locations, or the location that he was kind of mocked to prior to the draft was the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers, a team with a lack of selections in this past draft, used one of those, traded up especially, and used one of those to select Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral, who, in my opinion, is a bit of a project. He's got good potential, but he's a bit of a project. So I don't think he necessarily starts on in week one. However, the Carolina Panthers also house Sam Darnold, the quarterback position, and to me, that team isn't going to be primed to win more games than they won last year, and so that's why I'm a little hesitant about that being their final quarterback room. There have been reports that the Carolina Panthers aren't kicking the tires on a Jimmy Garoppolo, on a Jimmy Garoppolo potential relationship, and I think that though at this point it is almost assuredly. Known that if Garoppolo moves to the Panthers, Sam Darnold would have to come back in some capacity. I don't know if it'd be the entirety of the contract and things like that. And also, I don't think Carolina has a ton of cap space as compared to some of the other teams, whereas the 49ers might even have to eat the 49ers might have to eat some of the money or take back the entirety of Darnold's contract in a way. And so that's where there is a little skepticism around that situation, right? Although that isn't a potential possibility, and obviously taking back the full length, the full contract of Darnold's, his entire 18 million for this year, would likely net you a higher pick in return for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I mean, the 49ers like quarterbacks that just sit on the roster, right? So I mean, Sam Darnold really can be there as that third string, fourth string, whatever string quarterback in 2022, likely the second string. But yeah, the other option, obviously, one that not many people have floated around, I think has popped up a little more post combine. I think that is the Houston Texans. And I mean, when you look at the Houston Texans right now, who do they have? Davis Mills. However, as I said earlier in the show, the NFL is a year to year league. Every coach, especially coaches of the Texans, should know that even if you don't necessarily get worse year to year, if you don't marginally improve, then you might be out of a job. And Lovie Smith over there, he's a pretty old head coach. It's not like he's got room for development. He's a pretty well-established head coach. And so if he doesn't show results, the Houston Texans might do another one and done and try and hire one of the hot names at the head coaching market out of some of the bigger branches, potentially even a guy like D'Amico Ryans next year at the head coaching position. So I think in order to retain his job, at least from what we saw last year, Lovie Smith might need to win 6, 7, 8 games next year, or at least 6 games, in my opinion. And so that's where you have the Jimmy Garoppolo Davis Mills thing. And to me, I don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo wins that job in training camp, but at least he provides you adequate competition once he returns and becomes healthy. And so the only question then is, what's the compensation? Because Houston can actually take on the contract, right? They can take on both Mayfield's or Garoppolo's. They have 30 million in open cap space. However, what's the compensation? Will it be better than the third round pick that the 49ers will acquire via compensatory selection? Probably not. And so that's where the debate happens. Do you think that Jimmy Garoppolo stays on the roster? 49ers acquire a third round pick. If not, will they settle for less compensation to get him off the roster? That's where I'm a little skeptical because they've said multiple times that they won't cut him, even if it can help their roster in 2022, or use that money to carry over into 2023 free agency. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Fable JVC says cut him. James Coombs says agree he gets cut. And that's actually not one of the options that you talked about. And I think I tend to agree with you. I don't see the 49ers cutting Jimmy. They're just too dug in with how good they think he is and how quality of a player that he thinks he is. I mean, he obviously has done a lot as far as his character for this team. He's obviously a locker room favorite to a lot of players that are on the roster. So I see it more than likely him being on the team and them waiting for one of these teams that is competing to have their quarterback get injured and then trade him somewhere during the season for like a higher pick for a team that may be more desperate, right? So that's really what I think is gonna happen. Just because at that point, Jimmy Garoppolo's shoulder will be, strong enough to where people will see if he could still be a starter in the league or not. I just don't think that. I think that there's this notion that they're just waiting for him to be healthy, where they could cut him and then not even have to eat the 7.5 mil. I just don't think that 7.5 mil is as important to them as otherwise they would have. They could have cut him by now and done some stuff with that money. I just think that they already plan on spending that money, whether it's to Jimmy or not. My question to you is, do you see a scenario where they might even extend Jimmy and keep him on the roster? No?
No. I honestly don't, because first of all, that takes away every prerogative that they've tried over the past couple of years, right? First of all, you want a quarterback on a rookie contract. I think that is there. I can see restructuring Garoppolo. I'd hate it if they did it because I think that's one of the worst situations you can do financially, but they can shoulder it given the TV deals. They can restructure Garoppolo because he'd end up still being a free agent next year. But if you extend him, guess what? You're losing out on that third-year compensatory pick. And if they do it, I think it would be one of the worst moves they could do. Because first of all, you're not getting draft compensation in return. You're also extending him and probably changing his cap hit for this year, meaning his cap hit is going to be fairly high for the next 2 seasons. I'd assume it'll be a 2-year extension of sorts, maybe even just a 1 year. But that means your cap hit for Garoppolo is going to be significantly high for 2 seasons when you're trying to roster build and really, in reality, the 49ers have the best shot of winning a Super Bowl this year or next season. I think that is the majority of their window. It's essentially for the duration of Trey Lance's rookie deal, but it is for this year or next season. I don't think that it extends much longer than that. And so doing this just significantly hurts you. And so if you want to roster Garoppolo for 2022, do that and take the third round compensatory pick, but you can't keep him at a above average salary, potentially even a starting caliber salary for 2 seasons. I think that really, really significantly hurts you. Although they could potentially restructure him if they want to save the 18 million or so and make it 999 for the next 3 seasons.
Do you see a scenario where Jimmy Garoppolo is on this team the whole season?
Yeah, that could happen. I do think if he's on this, if he's on the roster week 1, there is a solid shot, right? Obviously, the expectation still would be that if a team gets an injury, maybe any team per se that's trying to compete gets an injury over there in 2022, or even they don't have to compete, right? If they're trying to keep their job, because injuries don't really or keep you from sustaining your job if you're performing poorly. So maybe if there's an injury to a quarterback, which we've seen a ton of in the past couple of years, then Garoppolo gets flipped. But obviously, if there's no big time injury, you can keep it. I think it would be even worse, really, to keep him on the roster and then cut him mid-season. That'd be really, really not, in my books, a smart move. And I also believe that his entire 27.5 million base salary does get guaranteed game one. I'm not fully sure on that. That's the one contract thing I'm trying to figure out right now. But I do think that it gets guaranteed come week one, which is I know people have called it the inflection point. So I do think that he won't be cut by any team, even if be it the 49ers or a team he gets traded to, should he be on a roster week one.
I love it. You did great work today, Rohan. You got through the gauntlet of questions. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on this week, my man.
Yeah, man. So this week I had a Larry Krueger show earlier this week on Larry Krueger's channel. Be sure to check him out. If you guys don't know him, then you probably are living under a rock. But no, I'm joking. But Larry Krueger had that earlier in the week. Me and Marco filmed an episode of 49ers Red Zone on Monday. So be sure to go check that out. And then upcoming tomorrow, I am restarting the 49ers roundtable where a bunch of 49er fans can come on the channel and just talk some 49ers in a group. I think we've got a good guest list of about 5-6 people tomorrow. So thank you guys for reaching out for that. Be sure to tune in. It'll be a ton of fun, and you guys can interact with us in the roundtable. And then Friday, I've got, I think, a double docket where I've got a Warriors show actually with a friend of mine, Ryan Smith, who is the producer for Larry Krueger at the moment. And then I've also got a night show with 49ers First Takes, Aaron over there. Great channel. Be sure to support him. So, yeah, that's my docket for the week. What about you?
Yeah, man. I'm going to be with CG Ruthless on Friday. Don't have anything planned for tomorrow quite yet, but you never know what's going to happen. But definitely keep it locked. Rohan's YouTube channel is in the description. Please, please, please take a minute to click on that link. Subscribe to Rohan. He does a lot of great work, and is just a favorite to all of the 49ers content creators. Love having him on the show, and he does a great thing, supporting all of us as well. So make sure you support him. If you haven't liked this video, please do so. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so. Rohan, I don't know if you saw me and Jesse's show yesterday on his channel, but if my channel gets to 900 subscribers by next Tuesday, which is when I go on with Jesse, I'm wearing a full lumberjack hat through the whole show and my lumberjack hoodie. So definitely, if you want to see that,
we got to get you to 900 then. We got to get
right. So I think
I'll create 50 burner accounts and sub then.
That'll be it. That's all we need. But like I always say, stay safe, stay healthy, stay hydrated. Remember, I'm not excited. Love you guys. Have a beautiful night, and we'll talk again very, very soon.